Hi SOAR students! Today we're going to be baking again, and we are going to make Mrs. P's pumpkin bars with cream cheese frosting. So for starters, I have got my oven preheating to 350 degrees, and I have a pan. It's called a sheet pan, a baking pan. Mine is 17 by 12. If you have a 15 by 10, that will work also, but you probably don't want to go any smaller than that. I have sprayed the entire bottom of the pan, being exceptionally careful at the corners to make sure that they get sprayed well so it doesn't stick. So in a large bowl, I'm going to start with 2 cups of flour, and to that I'm going to add 2 cups of sugar. And that does sound like a lot, and it probably is, but remember how big that pan is and how much that's going to be spread out, so it's not just all 2 cups in one serving. So added to that, baking soda, just 1 of that, and 2 teaspoons of baking powder. 1 and 2. Okay, now I'm going to give that just a real light mix, and then I'm going to take it and form a well, like a hole in the center, not quite all the way to the bottom, but I want an empty spot in the middle. That's where my wet ingredients are going to go. So into that hole, I'm going to start with my eggs. I need 4 eggs. So back to my recipe. I put 4 eggs in there. The next thing I'm going to add is 1 cup of vegetable oil. So 1 full cup of oil. And then the last ingredient that goes into here is a 15-ounce can of pumpkin. Now, when you get your pumpkin, pay attention that you are just getting 100% pure pumpkin, not pumpkin pie filling, because that has different spices and stuff in there. Not that it's going to harm this any to have spices in it, but if you want the recipe that I've always made and brought to SOAR in the past, you are going to want to have just the pumpkin. Mixer, I'm going to mix this up for about a minute or so, just enough to get it good and moist and everything blended really well. Okay, so that's about what it's going to look like when it's done. Pull my beaters out. Okay, I pulled the beaters out and I scraped them off. So now I'm going to pour this in my pan, and I'm going to make sure that I spread it around and have it nice and even. And then it goes into the oven, and it only bakes about 18 to 20 minutes. So I want to just try to get it as even as possible. Make sure that my corners are filled in, and there we go. It is ready to go in the oven. I'll show you what it looks like when I pull it out. So I took my pumpkin bars out of the oven, and they're just right. You know, nice and springs back when I lightly touch it. A little bit of golden brown on top here and there. I need to let this cool completely before I can frost it. By the time it takes this to cool, I'm setting out to soften 1 stick of butter and then a half of an 8-ounce brick of cream cheese. So those 2 need to come to room temperature and soften a little bit before I can make the frosting. So while that cools, those will soften, and we'll be back later to make the frosting. Okay, so my pumpkin bars are cooling and just about ready. So I'm going to start mixing my frosting. Like I said earlier, I have a stick of butter, which is a 1/2 cup, and 4 ounces or a 1/2 of a block of cream cheese. I've softened them, they're in my bowl. To that, I'm going to add about a teaspoon of vanilla. And then I'm going to beat that up really well. I'll be right back. Okay, I've beaten it up, so it's pretty smooth now. And the only thing I need to do now, have a spatula handy because you're going to have to scrape the bowl often as you do this next step and beat it in, is I'm going to add about 2 cups of sugar, powdered sugar, confectionery sugar. And you can, if you'd like, to avoid having the powdered sugar cloud when you first start, you can add a cup, beat it, and then add a second cup. And I say about 2 cups because when this is done, I'm going to take a look at the consistency, and I may add a little more powdered sugar or a little bit of milk, depending on where it's at, because I want it to be easy to spread on my bars. It actually turned out just right. Depending on what kind of cream cheese you use or the butter, you might have a different consistency. You can see the lines from where my beaters went through, and when I kind of give it a stir and pick my spatula up, see how the tips stay upright? They don't just melt down right away. That is right where I want it. So I've put my frosting on the top. Now you're gonna have to be really careful as you spread it here, because this recipe is super, super moist. And if you get it too thin, you're gonna pull up the top of the cake. So if you want, you can start with a real thin layer of the cream cheese frosting, kind of make a crumb layer, and then add the rest on top of that to keep it from crumbing. This recipe was one that I got from my grandmother. It's been in the family for a very long time. And this recipe makes a huge pan full, so it works really nice for big gatherings. Or you can make it and take some to one and then keep some for your family, or share it amongst different families. So that's it. If you want to get a little fancy, depending on the season, at St. Patrick's Day, I will take and sprinkle green colored sugars on top, or sometimes I take cinnamon sugar and sprinkle it on top. But it's perfect just the way it is. I hope you guys enjoy it.